any city, however small, is in fact divided into two. One, the city of the poor, the other of the rich. These are at war with one another. Socrates, Plato's Republic, Book 4. Good morning, everybody. This is your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same. Spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to start our study of Greek history. In the Archaic period, or building up to it at least, which begins around 750 BCE. The issue is there were populations in and around Greece dating back at least to like 3000 BCE with Crete and Cyprus. We actually talked about one of these during the Bronze Age collapse episodes that we did, the Mycenaean and the Minoan, two of them I guess, Mycenaean and Minoan cultures. These were literate societies, the Mycenaeans in particular, and they centered around palace economies that were occupied mostly by a royal elite. And we know this because they left us over 6,000 tablets written in a script called Linear B, which is related to Greek but is different and distinct from it. They were also fond of burying their kings with luxury goods that were obtained in like the Near East and places like Iran and modern day Iran and Iraq. Back then, I guess Persia, like Assyrian empires. And then we do end up with some actual evidence from the era, written evidence from Homer, the famous poet. He's one of the earliest sources that we have from this, and he describes a lost golden age. So already back then, in like the early Archaic period, Greeks were aware of a time period that was kind of like greater than their contemporary time period, which is kind of hard for us to imagine. In modern day culture, we always have this myth of eternal progress, but back then it was not uncommon about like a lost golden age, which is an interesting thought to entertain at least. Like, what would that be like if we knew that we were like off our high point as a civilization, right? Unfortunately, the Mycenaean Palace Society collapsed at the end of the Bronze Age, and there's basically like an intervening dark age afterwards. Remember from the Bronze Age collapse videos we did, sometime around like 1177 BCE, about 3,500 years ago, there was a constellation of horrible things. All four horsemen were there. The Sea People invasions, these migrating pirates were terrorizing Egyptians, Greeks, basically the whole Mediterranean. There were mass migrations that were caused likely by drought and famine. And then there was war with the Assyrian and Hittite empires. The aftermath of this, though, does plant the seeds of pretty much all Western civilization. In fact, even the Romans are likely descendants from the migrants who fled this devastation. And this is the time period when Greeks first colonized Cyprus, home of the Phoenicians. There is a relative dark age that washes over the Aegean, which is like the region that, like the sea that surrounds Greece, for several centuries. So for a few hundred years, there's really not much writing. We do have some evidence from archaeological findings that before this collapse, the Mycenaean culture was very uniform. Like all the cities kind of had similar architecture. It was pretty obvious, like a uniform culture. And afterwards, there's fragmentation. Places have different stuff. And this right here was an interesting thought. It does coincide, again, Bronze Age collapse leads into the Iron Age. During the Bronze Age, you have to have copper and tin, which are basically never in the same spots. And the trade of copper and tin was controlled by these palaces. Once the Bronze Age collapse happens, Iron Age technology is developed. And it probably was developed because trade was disrupted. And we finally get to the era that is named in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which these are really interesting because they tell us something about like the oldest trends in Western civilization. So for people who are unaware, the Iliad, it's about the siege of Troy and a war between the kings Agamemnon and Achilles. Then the Odyssey recounts the tale of a Greek hero, Odysseus, as he's on a journey going back home after the Trojan War is over. And what's really cool is the Iliad's central theme is how leaders should behave to do the best for their communities. So, again, this is the story, one of the oldest in Western civilization. It's about how leaders should treat their communities, which is a topic that I've been talking about a ton. So this is a pattern that dates back to literally the very foundation of Western culture and civilization. And there's a couple details that we can pick out from the Homeric poems, Iliad and Odyssey, that kind of tell us about the way these societies were structured. So one, we know that Homeric society was hierarchical, and it was divided between the haves and the have-nots, the wealthy and poor, the rich and not rich. Just like that quote from the Socrates that I opened the video with. Wealth was a signifier of rank and status. Throughout like the Homeric poems, they talk a lot about personal honor and stuff. And personal and familial honor outweighed the community. And we can take this just by the motivations that our heroes are given. So in the Iliad, Achilles could have returned after he left the fight and, fought to save Greek lives, like his countrymen's lives, but he doesn't because he felt like his honor was besmirched. When he does finally return to the fight, it's not because he cares about Greek community at large, it's because his personal friend Patroclus, I think that's how you pronounce it, had been killed. And then on the other side of this battle, we have the Trojan hero Hector, who famously lists his reasons for going to battle as personal honor and concern for his family. Loyalty to the wider community played little to no part in either of them. And then we can fast forward and we have Hesiod of Askra in Boeotia, who's a famous Greek poem from the early Archaic period or early Iron Age. And I think his statements really kind of tell us about what the underclass, the poor people's perspective was on all this. So I quote from Hesiod, "Would that I had died before or been born later." So he's wishing that he had died or been born later. "For now truly is a race of iron. There is no end to toil and misery by day, nor to perishing by night." So, yeah. So that's a very clear parallel between modern culture and Greek culture there. So the next is pretty interesting though, because for millennia civilization had been dominated by kings, but the Bronze Age collapse led to this diaspora, which is just where the early Greeks migrated away from the Mycenaean palace cultures. And they do something different this time. So for thousands of years, kings and palaces, kingdoms, those are the dominant form of society everywhere, like all over the globe, not just in the West. But the descendants from the Bronze Age collapse in Greece experiment with democracy for the first time. They build more egalitarian cultures. They also come up with metal coinage for the first time. They develop natural philosophy, which is like the rudiments of actual science for the first time in our history. It's really no exaggeration to say that the roots of Western civilization are laid during the early Archaic period of Greece. And that's where we're going to end today. Just kind of like setting the stage for our later discussions of Greek culture and civilization. So just a few takeaways, or next time we'll start talking about some more memorable or familiar people like the Spartans and the Athenians. But a couple takeaways for today is that since the dawn of human civilization is the story of hierarchy from the very beginning, for better or worse. Dating all the way back is in our earliest stories. It's tales of hierarchy, kings and queens, mostly kings back then. But here's a more positive takeaway. The collapse of civilization, like what happened with the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, sometimes paves the way for something greater. For hundreds and hundreds of years, everywhere had been dominated by these elite palace economies. And it isn't until after they're destroyed during the Bronze Age collapse that democracy flourishes for the first time. It begins in Athens, but it eventually spreads throughout most of Greece. And that's really where our current culture has its roots. So, like a forest fire, it seems that things need to burn down every now and then for us to progress. So, that's really all I've got for you guys today. tomorrow we will talk about American history again, picking up basically leading up to closing the gap between the colonies and the actual revolution. And then we'll go back to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics the day after that on Sunday. I've been able to kind of plot my journey, which will begin next week and probably go through the end of August into early September. And then after that, I'm going to have to, I should be able to write another blog post tonight, actually, at least one. But I'm definitely going to have to finish up all of my blog posts later this fall and winter. So whenever I'm not traveling as much, I'll have something to do, which will be cool. That's really all I've got for you guys today. So what are y'all doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your communities today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part. You can count on me to do mine daily. Until next time, I love y'all.